All right, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, the digital education partner of the Toronto Zoo. I'm so excited today, because today is the penultimate program in our Climate Action Learning and Leadership series over the summer, featuring amazing stories from zoo staff, zoo volunteers, interns, all on climate change and amazing creatures that you can find at the Toronto Zoo. Just 2 days ago, we were joined by call interns Kenya and Farhan talking about the greater one-horned rhino, or the Indian rhinoceros, a really exciting program that you can check out on the YouTube channel from us at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants and the Toronto Zoo. Today, we are joined by an animal synonymous with chill and one of Canada's iconic creatures, certainly the poster child for climate change in the world, and that is the polar bear. And guiding us through that process are going to be call interns Nubat and Noel. I'm so excited to turn it over to them to dive in on this amazing creature, one of my favorite animals personally on this planet. I hope you're as excited as I am, and please feel free to share your comments and questions in the YouTube chat bar. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Noel and Nubat. Welcome in, guys, and take us away.
Hello, everybody. My name is Noel.
And my name is Nubat.
And we are interns here at the Toronto Zoo, where our mission is to connect people, animals, and conservation science to help fight extinction. We are part of the Climate Action Learning and Leadership program that brings youth to the zoo and teaches them all about climate change, how it affects our species, and what they can do to help. For the past 10 weeks now, we've been shadowing various staff all around the zoo. But today we're super excited to talk to you guys about our polar bears and how they are affected by climate change in the wild. We also have our polar bear keeper here, Jen, and she will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So today we have Aurora and Nikita as our polar bears. Nikita's there in the water. Aurora is up there on the rock. Aurora and Nikita are both tied for being our oldest polar bears here at the zoo, and they were found as orphans. Polar bears are very well known for their white coat. However, underneath that coat, they also have a thick layer of black skin. This helps them conserve heat in the Arctic. Polar bears actually have many different physical traits which help them conserve heat in the Arctic, such as their small ears and their small nose as well. And they also have inner eyelids, which help them to not be blinded by the ice and the snow. Polar bears can be as long as 2.5 to 3.5 meters, as tall as 1.2 to 1.6 meters, and they can weigh as much as 600 kilograms, which is as much as 10 people. Polar bears also have various behaviors, which switch depending on what season it is. During the winter, polar bears love to scour the ice cover to hunt for ringed seals, which is their favorite prey. However, they will settle for any other type of seal. Only 2% of these hunts are successful, however, which means that they have to spend 50% of their life hunting for these seals. During the summer, these polar bears love to be in more forested areas so that they can keep cool, and they love to forage berries on the ground as well as bird eggs they can find in nests and some small land mammals. Polar bears, of course, love hanging out in Arctic areas. This includes the shores of Alaska all the way to the northern shores of Russia. But however, most polar bears are in Canada, which ranges all the way from Yukon to Labrador. However, they only go usually as south as the Hudson Bay shores and as north as the very tip of Ellesmere Island. The polar bear's breeding season is in between January and June, I'm sorry. And that usually peaks around March and April. They have the unique trait of having a different pregnancy period and gestation period, as gestation period is the period in between where the egg is fertilized and the birth of the cubs, while the pregnancy period is in between the mating session and the birth of the cubs. Due to their delayed implantation, they have a gestation period of only 4 months, while their pregnancy period is 6 months. The number of offspring is usually in between 1 and 4. However, the most common amount is 2. And they have a lifespan of in between 25 and 30 years. Now, Newbat will share to you a little bit about how climate change can affect this lifespan.
Yeah, so climate change poses a serious threat to polar bears in the wild, as shown by their vulnerable status on the IUCN Red List. They are primarily carnivores, and in the wild, seals make up most of their diet, and this can consist of ring seals and sometimes bearded seals. But you might wonder, why does this information matter? And it's because polar bears need a platform such as sea ice so that they can hunt for seals, and they like to wait by seal dens or wait by spaces in the ice and wait for seal heads to pop up so they can attack. They tend to hunt earlier in the year, and without this sort of ice platform, the polar bears can starve if it forms late or not at all. And as they hunt earlier in the year, with sea ice melting earlier in the spring, they no longer have enough time to scavenge for food, which is already an issue for them. The main cause of polar bear cubs has actually been found to be lack of food or lack of fat in breastfeeding mothers, which leads back to the sea ice issue. And there's also some old chemicals that have been found in the polar bear aquatic habitat that is negatively impacting the male reproductive system, making it more difficult to reproduce. Considering that they already have one of the slowest reproductive rates of any mammal, this isn't good news. And this importance of sea ice is further highlighted not only by observation but by assessment as well. So the IUCN has done an assessment a few years ago where they declared that loss of sea ice due to climate change is the single most important threat to the long-term survival of polar bears. And this assessment also estimated that in the next 35 to 40 years, more than 30% of their global population will decline. Another threat to them, while not as serious yet but still concerning, is the exploitation of oil and fossil fuels in the Arctic. So around 20% of these natural resources can be found in that area. And with sea ice receding, it's becoming easier to access these resources, which is great for countries who want them, but it's unfortunate for polar bears and other wildlife in the Arctic. Any oil spills or leaks that happen can negatively impact the polar bears by either getting into their food sources, so it can poison them, or it can actually reduce the insulating power of their fur, and this means that they have to spend more energy trying to stay warm. And again, for the energy, they need to have more food, and they can barely get the food that they need just to survive. And again, like oil and water don't go together, so oil spills, as you can imagine, could be hard to clean on ice. One obvious example of climate change is actually growler and grizzly bears. So growler bear and grizzly bear are terms for grizzly bear and polar bear hybrids. So growler means that the grizzly bear is the father, and grizzly means that the polar bear is the father. And while grizzly bears and polar bears have shared overlapping land for a long amount of time, with the sea ice receding, polar bears are heading further and further south in search for food and spending more time on land, while the grizzly bear's range extends further north. It's not really the overlapping land that's the problem, but more so the increasing frequency at which both species are on the same land at the same time and during breeding season. A lot of people assume that a hybrid species would be better adapted to a changing Arctic environment, as we've seen. However, this is most likely not going to be the case, as the hybrid species have been found to not be well suited for a marine or terrestrial environment, and they are weaker than both parent species. This is also bad in terms of genetic swamping, where a rare species like polar bears that is at risk for extinction has its genes being overwhelmed by hybrid genes. And as this becomes more popular and common, we're losing the amount of pure polar bear breeds in the wild. So while polar bears seem like they may be far from our reality, almost 60% of them actually live in Canada, and not just in far northern areas, but there are also some that can be seen in Ontario. So there's our very own Polar Bear Provincial Park that's located in the Hudson Bay Lowlands, and around 13 of the 19 total subpopulations of polar bears actually live in Canada as well. We can have a significant impact on the improvement of their lives by reducing our carbon footprint, and this can be done in a multitude of ways. So some simple steps are biking, walking, or taking public transit instead of driving, increasing the number of meatless meals in your diet, and also could be showering instead of bathing, and many other small lifestyle changes. Some bigger steps that you can take is supporting polar bear research, and any donation, whether small or big, could make a huge difference. Along with that, simply visiting the zoo, a place where there are lots of conservation efforts and polar bears are being bred in a non-wild environment, helps support polar bears. So if anything were to ever happen to the population in the wild, there is still an active population outside that can be released into the wild when they're ready. Some other steps that are being taken around the world are critical subpopulations are being protected from human activity. Polar bears are being deterred from busy, human populated areas where they may be killed by a scared human, or they may end up eating polluted food, and so many other issues that can be caused by humans. And another step is that Arctic areas are being mapped out where they may be more resilient to climate change, and these areas may be more favorable for the polar bears to live in. So that's one big step that we're taking. So I hope you got to learn something new today, and I encourage you to start or continue supporting polar bears and important conservation research. If you have any questions, this would be a great time to ask.
Fantastic. I thought it was a great presentation. You guys really know your stuff. That was awesome. Before we dive in on polar bears in general and talking with Jen maybe about some of the details of polar bears, I do want to invite anyone tuning in on our YouTube channels to ask any questions they might have. But I want to start with one of my own. You mentioned all these really simple things that people can do at home to help mitigate climate change, help protect polar bears, and by extension, all animals. Is there anything that you two personally have done since you joined the CULL program? So as you've been learning over these 10 weeks, meeting with all these amazing keepers, learning about climate change, are there things that you've done in your own lives to help sort of make a difference?
Well, I've noticed as a part of the CULL program, I've become a lot more aware of
Oh, we've lost them ever so briefly. The perils of broadcasting outdoors sometimes. We'll see if we can get Robert back and our team Noel Newbat in just a minute. Let's see. Sorry for the trouble, guys. I'm going to move them out of the broadcast for just a second. But while we're waiting for them to get back, and I know it's really hot today in Toronto, so I know sometimes phones have a little bit of trouble with that. I did want to highlight again that if you're keen to learn more about polar bears, learn more about the amazing work being done at the zoo, both of the CULL program, their conservation efforts, and all the incredible wildlife they have, do check out torontozoo.com. They do so much there. Zoos really are leading the charge in the world on conservation and education. So I really encourage you guys to check that out. It's an amazing site. And of course, you can visit the Toronto Zoo now in person, which is really exciting. Just off camera there, we've got a whole bunch of guests enjoying the zoo and enjoying the polar bears today. If you haven't been to the zoo, it was a huge inspiration for me as a kid, almost directly led to me ending up in conservation education. So I think that influence is something that anyone can replicate. Go, head out with your family. It's a really exciting time. Personally, I'm so glad we got the chance to talk about polar bears today. I am recently getting back from Churchill, Manitoba, classically the polar bear capital of the world. And as Newbat was mentioning, polar bears can be seen in Canada in a huge variety of places. Polar Bear Provincial Park, I brought up on the screen earlier today. But the place that most people go if they do see polar bears is Churchill, the polar bear capital of the world. An amazing town, really fun community. Also peak beluga season right now there. So instead of a safari around the world, some of those travels aren't really possible right now amidst COVID. If you get the chance to go to Churchill, I really encourage you to do so. There's nothing quite like seeing the world's apex predator live in the wild. Something that, again, just a couple weeks ago, I got the chance to do. A really special moment in my life. One great organization, I'm going to try and pull up their website here while we're waiting for our zoo team to get back. Polar Bears International is the only conservation organization dedicated entirely preserving polar bears. So check them out. I'll bring them up later because we do have our zoo team back, which is great. Hello, zoo team.
Overheating. It is very hot right now. It is like 35 degrees. So we are back now. Hopefully this works.
Fingers crossed. We were just asking about. I was filling the time talking about some cool polar bear conservation organizations, some of the stuff you guys do at the zoo. But you were mentioning some of the things that you were doing in your life based on climate. So let's see if we can get that answer in again.
Yes, Noel. What do you do?
Absolutely. So yeah, we do a bunch of different things to kind of be more aware of conservation in general and the species around us. So one thing that we were mentioning is that we use a lot of things that are reusable, such as straws and cups and water bottles and things like that. And that way, although it's just such a small step, it's really easy. And we can just do that. And we know that we're playing a small part. Another big role that we play as well is that we can educate a lot of people, since people know that you're at the zoo and you're doing a program here, they really want to know more about zoo and animals, and oftentimes they end up asking you. So it's a great opportunity to educate them on how polar bears and how other species as well are affected by climate change.
Yeah. I absolutely love that answer. I think it's so important. It's something we've covered in all our call programs is the power of education. When you guys came into this program, you weren't experts, and here you are getting to present to people all around Canada and beyond with the knowledge that you've gained over these 10 weeks. And so now we've empowered kids that are tuning in to do the exact same thing, to talk to their parents, to talk to their friends, to help inspire them. And so I think that's a fantastic message. We've got a question from Caitlin, who's 9, coming in on YouTube. How many polar bears are in the exhibit? We saw the 2 that you guys showed us. How many total are there in the whole polar bear area?
So we have 5 polar bears. At the moment, I believe 3 are out. Of course, we have Aurora and Nikita. Nikita is now on the ice ball. Aurora is enjoying a nice lettuce snack in the water.
Nice.
And then over on the other exhibit on the other side, I don't know if you probably can't see it, but it looks like Juno, I believe, is over there at the moment. And then we also have two other polar bears that are out at the moment, and those 2 are Humphrey and Hudson.
Yeah. So are there ever all 5 in the same exhibit together? Like, do they all get along, or do you have to separate them in certain times?
So animals are, the polar bears are actually, they're very solitary animals. They prefer to be alone most of the time. So we do keep them separate. They hunt alone, and the only time in the wild they really interact is for breeding purposes. So unless they're kind of like Aurora and Nikita here, who have been together for a really long time, we tend to keep them separate.
Yeah, excellent. I've got a question that probably is going to take us to Jen in a minute, but we noticed the polar bear eating a lettuce snack, and I must admit I'm a little surprised about that. So for those of us who thought that polar bears were always only eating things like seals, do they eat vegetables as part of their diet, both in the wild and regularly at the zoo?
Yeah, they do. They actually, all 5 of them love lettuce. Weirdest thing. But we kind of figured that must be similar to what they would be eating in the wild in the summertime. So they would eat like seagrass and kelp and stuff if they came across it. Yeah. They're not going to say no to any food in the summertime, but that's just kind of like their light time of the year. They're mostly fasting. But if they find like fruits and vegetables, like
why not?
Then they'd go for it. But our bears, they love the lettuce year round. They mostly like the vegetables as well. We give them pears and apples and carrots and sweet potatoes. And they seem to like it pretty consistently year round. In the wintertime, they get really heavy on the meat and the fish, but they do get just a little bit of that right now this time of year as well.
Yeah, how cool is that? So you can be as big and strong and cool as a polar bear if you eat your vegetables. I think that's one of our abiding lessons of this program. So you mentioned that it's hot out. We've got the summertime. You mentioned 35 degrees. The phone couldn't even take it. So one of the questions we always get when we talk polar bears at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants is, how do they handle the summer? I mean, we've got the bears in the water. It's a little bit cooler there. Are they okay with this temperature? And what do you guys do differently in the summer?
I mean, this exact temperature might be getting a little bit warm for them right now, as it is for the rest of us.
Yeah.
We have a pool in every exhibit, so they just go swimming to cool down. We give them popsicles, other random ice treats, and the house, they just like to go in there for the shade. So you'll often see them hanging in there anyways, just because it's shadier. Sometimes it's a bit cooler. But even wild polar bears, they'd be experiencing warmer temperatures anyways.
Yeah.
Not quite as hot as today, but they're definitely used to the heat as well. They just do the same as us. Don't do much, laze around, don't exert too much energy.
Perfect. I'm with you. I'm inside in a fairly air-conditioned house, and it's still pretty hot. So it's a little bit unusual today, but I'm glad they have that option. I'm heading to the beach after this program to jump in the water too. For it. So I'm curious. By the way, sorry, if we have any more questions coming in on YouTube, please do share those. I did promise as well that I would share Polar Bears International as an amazing organization helping to conserve polar bears. So do check out their website below. We mentioned that we saw a polar bear at the beginning playing with this ball. So this is something that we didn't necessarily get a chance to see with the rhino. It's an example of enrichment. Can you explain a little bit about why that's important for the bears to play with something and what that looks like?
Yeah, so enrichment is just really important for animals to kind of get a similar simulation to what they would have in the wild. So for polar bears that are playing around with these balls and buckets and things like this, they would often have like a similar idea. For example, down here we have a floating bucket. It might just be similar to them as in the wild, like a floating piece of ice that they might play around with or try to get on top of. So enrichments like this really help them kind of connect with being in the wild and help them stay active and help them kind of enjoy the habitat that they have been given.
Yeah.
That they have right there, it has food inside it. So having like a frozen layer outside, it gives them a little challenge before they get to their food, like they would in the wild, hunting for food, right? So.
Yeah, I love it. Just like we use toys in games, and there's Kinder Surprise with the toy inside the chocolate. It's a good time. Like all these things make it a lot more fun. We're getting a bunch of questions on YouTube now. So this is an interesting question. We've never got this one of our programs before. The Polar Paws team wants to know: do the females spar at all? Do they play fight? Do they have any activities like that?
We haven't really seen any sparring. It's mostly the boys who would do that. The girls have lived together for so long that they don't really fight. They'll maybe have like a slight little vocalization at each other. That's probably the most it'll be. And they do seem to kind of like change who's in charge, like who's the dominant one a little bit throughout the year. But it's really only over food, and it's just like one little yell at each other, and then they're kind of done. That's about it.
Like if
I'm going to jump in here real quick, Jesse. Sorry, I think my phone is about to overheat as well. Maybe we'll take one more question, and I think my phone might just not be able to handle the heat today.
No worries. I know it's a pretty toasty day out there. So one last question. I love it from Kimberly. She's 5. She wants to know, what's the difference between a mama bear and a papa bear? I know you talked about this a little at the beginning, but males and females, is there any big difference we can share?
I mean, basically just the size. They are pretty much solitary. Mothers raise the young. The father has no part in that. But yeah, mainly just a size difference. Males are definitely bigger. They do the sparring. They kind of fight over the females. Yeah, and the females are just a little bit smaller. If they're in the den, they'll fast a little bit longer. That's pretty much it. Not too many other behaviors different.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jen, Newbat, Noel. You guys are amazing today. Thanks for making it work with the phone. I know when it's too hot for the phone, we should all go have some popsicles and hang out in the air conditioning like our polar bears get the chance to do. But thank you so much for sharing your passion and enthusiasm today for this amazing creature, for the amazing call program. As I've said, if you want to learn more about the call program and everything else going on at the zoo, torontozoo.com. Heading through, it's an amazing place. I really encourage you to check it out. So, ladies, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. And bye for now, everybody.